Hello and welcome. So we have a chat box on the side. We're going to have a few little questions here and there and a Q&A at the end. This is kind of a topic that's affecting all of us. We are about a week to election day and there's a lot going on in the media right now. So we're going to talk about this concept called new media literacy. When I say new media literacy, I'm referring to how technology is affecting media literacy there. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So this is identify and understand the new media literacy. Okay, great. You can hear us. Thank you. I appreciate that. We're trying out some Bluetooth headphones here, so I'm not connected to all these wires and I knock something over because that will happen. We're going to talk about some things you probably already know, the importance of media literacy, but we're really going to dive into some tech trends and things that are going on. We're talking about how we consume it, when, who, and where, fake and AI versus human. And we're going to go into some updated strategies for teaching the new media literacy. As technology changes, as information changes, we have to update how we teach this. I don't know about any of you. I'm an old millennial. I remember card catalogs and having to fill out little sheets that I would take to the librarian at the school. I remember having to go through piles and piles of physical magazines or journals or whatever it is to find information. So the issue wasn't the quantity of information it was finding. It wasn't the quality, it was the quantity. It was harder to get that information. You had to dig a little bit more, and we're kind of in the opposite realm where we have so much quantity of it, but we struggle to find the quantity. So we've got to shift our way of doing this, and we're going to dive into that today, and we're really glad that you are here. So letting you know that this portions of this webinar were done for Utah State Library in 2019. I am a former librarian. I don't know if we have any other librarians here, but I like to say that I was into media literacy before it was cool. So if you are a librarian, you were also very much into media literacy. I wrote if you want to dive into more of this concept of a new media literacy, I wrote for the Connected Learning Alliance on updating the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, why for the new media literacy. I would also recommend checking out Connected Learning Alliance. There's some really great resources around media literacy as well. And then of course there's our website. So welcome. We're going to dive in because there's a lot of content, but I want to make sure that we have time for questions at the end, and you can also put things in the chat box as we go through. So I'm going to be preaching to the choir here, but if you think media literacy is important, you're going to be here already. But I just kind of wanted to dive in of like why. There's a really great article why we need a new approach to teaching digital literacy, and I have 3 slides of links at the end if you want to check those out. Is what are the consequences for not being able to be media literate? We're seeing it right now. We have more misinformation, disinformation, fake news, all of this stuff going on. And adults are really, really struggling with this. And adults have enough context to really get some of it, but they're still not, because media literacy is more than just fact checks, as we are going to dive into later in this webinar. So if you are someone who's not media literate, it can affect your health and safety. And so if you think of online safety, media literacy is online safety. If we want to be safe and responsible online, it's not just about avoiding stranger danger, it's about evaluating information properly. So we're not doing too good right now. So this is from a recent Gallup and Knight poll, and also Pew Research just found that we have near record lows of trust in institutions. And so what this means is, like, we get so much media and there's a lot of bias in that media that some people are just like, I can't trust anything. And I hear this from young people. We teach teens and young people concept of media literacy, and I've heard from teenagers, well, I just can't trust anything. I don't trust adults. I don't trust social media. I trust nothing. And I get where they're coming from. And a lot of US adults say the same thing. They just don't trust institutions. But there is some great information out there that's fact checked, that's rigorous, that goes to the primary sources. There's so much great information out there. So when you just don't trust anything, you are more likely to fall under influence of very partisan or biased resources. If you don't trust anything, you can be vulnerable. There's a lot to distrust, but there is a lot to trust as well. And when that trust erodes in our public institutions, it's a problem. And I apologize for the small print there, but this is another survey that just came out in 2020 saying over 20,000 American adults that say that media literacy is critical or very important to democracy. If you don't trust institutions, well, democracy is an institution. Government is an institution. Elections are an institution. And when we feel overwhelmed and we don't trust anything, then sometimes we just stop. We check out, and we don't want to be checked out. I get the feeling of wanting to be checked out because it can be a little bit overwhelming. But if you check out, you're not only not a very good digital citizen, you're not a citizen as well. So this is really important stuff. You can find it in the Common Core. You can find it in the ISTE standards of students under Knowledge Constructor. It's part of our education standards already, but how schools implement it can be different. I've seen a wide range of how media literacy is taught in schools, when it's taught in schools. I know here in Utah, we don't often have qualified license or certification of media specialists until junior high. So a young person might not get any kind of media literacy education, because often that comes from the library, until they're in junior high. So it's part of our education standards, but how schools and districts implement it can be wide and varied. And so a lot of this, sometimes education can happen at home, not just schools. So I wanted to pause for a second. So Tay is putting some of those links there that I just referred to on those polls. If anyone wants to add what you think of the importance of media literacy, or how it's done in your school, I'm curious what's been implemented, if anything. Sometimes there's some great curriculum and things out there, but media literacy is kind of shoved in a lot of different subjects. Librarians often do it, English language arts, we have even science. So talking to some other media literacy educators, I had one say it needs to be embedded in all curriculum, but it's not always done that way. So feel free to chat, to add in there. We're monitoring the chat box, and I'd love to hear what you think about the importance of media literacy is. And I'm going to move on here as we get and dive into tech trends. So I mentioned how old school I was. I used a card catalog. My first library job, they had a card catalog. So it's changed how we get information and evaluate information, and that means we need to change as well. So I'm going to dive into some different types of software apps trends here, and we're going to discuss them a little bit. Feel free, as I said, to add any questions on here. You might have heard this term deep fake. Machine learning generated image and or video. So we have improved how we've done machine learning. So I'm trying to remember the exact quote, but back in like 2013, 2014, remember the Hobbit movie? There, they took like a team of 30 people to do that type of graphics. So a lot of this started in movies. The CGI had huge budgets in movies because it was very, very expensive to make that. But now we have machines that learn. It's not as time intensive to create those fake orcs or whatever we want in a movie there, because the machine can anticipate what happens next. So someone doesn't have to individually code every single thing now. So that's great, especially for movies. CGI is improved. If you look at something from even the year 2000, you're like, well, that's not real. But the media literacy consequence of that, it is easier to make things look more realistic than it ever does. As we get more and more data on the internet, we upload things on social media platforms or YouTube, that data makes it even easier. So a lot of deep fakes were done with celebrities in the beginning or politicians. So this, I'm not going to show the video, but this is one but that BuzzFeed News reported on with Obama. Looks very realistic. And there's some other very, very realistic ones. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier. If we are not trusting even the videos or pictures, because it used to be like, oh, well, there's a picture of it, there's a video of it, it happens. But if we can't trust that, then that also erodes our trust in democracy. And a popular target for deep fake videos are politicians. So we got Angela Merkel is in a deep fake video. We have Brazil's president. We have a number of political leaders that have been in a deep fake video, and that kind of makes you wonder what's real, and that erodes that trust in institutions. So this is related to deep fakes. So deep fakes are typically when we talk about videos, but we also are a lot better at creating fake, these pictures in this screen, none of them are real people. These are computer generated images. So a lot of this is, as it's in this quote, freely available. So this is an article that from the Washington Post about actually apps and dating apps, is that it's before, and I still tell this to kids, and it's still valuable advice. You want to do a reverse Google image search on that profile picture. Is that a real person? Is that just a stock photo? But now we have learning that can create just a unique face that's not a stock photo that you can't find online, and that's easier to trick. And so in these, look at them, they look very realistic to me. It would be very, very hard to differentiate that. So some of that, I still recommend doing a reverse image search, but if technology is improving in our videos and images so much, some of the tools and strategies that we're using to teach young people or even ourselves gets harder and harder. It's just harder and harder to differentiate that. So some of these are used in dating profiles. They can be used in other places. It can be hard to know. The computer just gently manipulates different facial features based on other images that they get. So we've been talking about deep fakes and images. Let's talk about, so voice activating. So Lyrebird was part of Adobe, and now it's been bought out by an AI research division with Descript, but it basically can manipulate different voices. And so when you think of like old school manipulating of different voices, it sounded very machine generated. You could be like, oh, well, that's a computer. Well, we've improved on that technology, so it's harder and harder to differentiate an actual voice versus a machine. So you might call in for a call center to get help on something, and it sounds like a person on the phone, but it actually is a computer. And before you could tell, like, oh, it's press 1 for this, that's a computer. But now you're like, I don't know. And they have scripts that they've learned, and it sounds just like a person. You have even people buying software to create their own scripts for maybe a voice answering this machine. There are virtual assistants that can mimic voices as well to make an appointment for you or schedule something for you. So Lyrebird is one. There's more out there as well, but we've been able to manipulate the sound of voices even better. Now, if you talk to this person, this fake person for a while, you're going to figure it out because maybe there's extra pauses between the conversation. And once you ask something that gets off script, they can't follow the script. But still, we are better at having the sound of people now. So we're better at images, we're better at videos, and we're better at voice. So along with that, some more other tech trends are AI generated content. So this is a recent story. Microsoft got rid of journalists on their main MSN website. Content aggregators, where you, like a Huffington Post or Forbes or something like that, they produce so much content, and some of that content, those blogs, those short pieces, are also created by AI. So this just happened in July. The journalists were let go for a lot of the work on the site. So you plug in a lot of data, they create a story out of it. And that's not always a bad thing, because sometimes a story is clear cut. Sometimes media can be very like, this happened, like an AP news source, this happened. But, you know, there's still a human behind some of these stories, but it's harder on some sites to know what's real and what's fake. And part of this trend is because it's expensive. And unfortunately, when we need news more than ever, a lot of journalists, especially local news journalists, have been laid off. Facebook and some social media have hurt some of the revenue streams that we have from our traditional news sources. People aren't paying for news like they used to, so this is part of the result. They're trying to cut costs, and they cut costs by cutting out the humans there. So there's a couple sites out there. I mentioned Wibbits and Wordsmith, but there are other programs out there that can mimic blog posts or even videos, and they can create short content without the human piece there. So I want to pause for a second and give a time for questions, but I just, curious if you have any questions on some of the technology trends I've mentioned and what happens. And you can't trust what you see and hear. So Tay's just shared a link from Wired. That's one news writing bot story. But what do you think? Is this a person? Is this a bot? Who wrote this story? Who made this video? Is this a real video? What happens when this occurs? So yeah, that is a great one. I read that news bot story partly for this, but even since that Wired story, they've improved. The bot writing is improved as well. And I was sad to see that a lot of the journalists were laid off at MSN. Okay, I'll just pause for one bit more. Any thoughts or comments on what happens when you can't trust what you see and hear? I think we saw a little bit of that with that Gallup and Knight poll that I showed earlier. I think we can also maybe see an effect by people believing more conspiracy theories because there's an erosion of that trust in institutions. You just can't believe anything. Okay, so we're gonna dive into a little bit more of the tech trends, but also evaluating how we teach media literacy. So when I wrote, if you check that article in the beginning, the CLA Alliance one, I updated the who, what, where, when, and we're gonna go through some of those W's for the 21st century. So who and where, and I mentioned this a little bit, who's real and where did it come from? So what are some things that we can do to teach young people how to really evaluate this media literacy? So this is actually from a 2016 quote from about Russian Twitter bots spreading fake news. Guess what? It's happened again in the 2020 election. They've actually gotten a little bit better at spotting a bot. Twitter has, but it's still a problem. Bots are still a problem. And this is a quote from one FBI agent. So it's easier to convince someone the information is true. So some of what we would see in bots are just retweeting certain controversial posts, but the bots were hitting the right and the left, just kind of sowing some discord. And I think we're definitely seeing some discord online. So there's a great source called the Digital Forensics Lab. If you want to just go #BotSpot, we have improved. Some of the technology has improved in tracking these bots, but it's still very difficult because, as I was saying earlier, we can mimic writing better. We can mimic and make our own faces that don't exist better than we used to. So these are some ways you can spot a bot, but when we're talking about the who of media literacy, we need to talk about, is that a person or a bot? How do we spot the bot? So these are some questions that you can ask. URL shorteners are a kind of like a red flag that's a bot and not a person. If they're only retweeting and they're not posting their own content. This is an actual bot that I took a screenshot of. I think you can maybe see the problem. Eric Young, just a woman who loves Jesus. So you can probably see an issue there if you look at the profile, but they are getting smarter. And there's that piece of digital forensics, being able to break things down and look at it not just from what was the institution, who was the person writing it, but was that person real or not. So Tay also is that a little quiz here. If you want to learn if you can spot the bot, try out a quiz and see how good you are. I have to confess, I teach some of this stuff, but this is not easy. It's not easy at all. So on the subject of bots, so infamously in 2016, Microsoft created an AI Twitter bot. So this bot took all of the information it could find on Twitter, was like, oh, this is how humans speak. And unfortunately, within 24 hours, it was spreading hate speech. So I think that goes to say how much hate speech there is on Twitter. They tried it again. They really tried it again. Later again, they revamped the algorithm. Same thing. Sorry, Tay, not you. Tay was still spouting hate speech 24 hours later. So I mentioned this because the bots are learned from us. And if you educated someone solely through Twitter, this is probably what would happen because that's what they're being exposed to. That's what they're seeing. So the bot just assumes that's normal. Just assumes. To me, the story of Tay Twitter bot is a story about the people behind the screen. And we need to educate children and young people on that yes, there are these bots and these algorithms and this AI, but we created them. They get the data from us. And so what does that say about our values, our norms, if within 24 hours, we have a bot saying hate speech? That to me says something. So it's a little unfortunate. So some other questions. If we're determining AI or human, I wish I could only say that bots were saying hate speech within 24 hours, but that's definitely not true. But some other kind of questions you could ask are, do they attribute it? Where did this come from? Is it, if you find peer-reviewed journals, they reference everything they find. They cite their sources. An AI or human is not going to do that. Sometimes you might find pauses. You might find weird tweeting activity, a flurry of tweets, then nothing. Now, normal people do that too, of course. You also might find it on the right and the left, going back and forth, because it's just getting data from different things. But these are really deep, critical thinking questions, and technology and the improvements of technology has forced us to really dive deeper into this. I don't know if you remember when you were a kid, I would get like worksheets and we would get like an article and the teacher would be like, okay, well, who said it? What did they say? Why did they say it? How did they say it? And where did they say it? Or when did they say it? And those are all great things. We need to teach the foundations, but we also need to dive even deeper with technology. We need to think even deeper. But unfortunately, we have so much information flying at us that we're overwhelmed. And to pause and actually go through these questions and think is hard. This is hard stuff. We don't often go beyond the headline. So I'm going to go into more strategies for teaching, but I do want to pause for a second here. If you have any questions or thoughts, this webinar will be archived later, so you can access it. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, but I also encourage you to check out some references if you want to learn more, and Tay is posting that in the chat. But questions or thoughts on some of these topics. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom because I actually believe in people's intelligence, but I won't lie, some days, this is hard stuff. So let's teach the realities of media. Let's not teach the realities of media in 1980 or 1990. We need to teach the realities of media in 2020 and beyond. How do we do this? So I'm going to throw some strategies out there as well. Oh, and great question, Lori. So I don't know if I can share my screen exactly, but if you go under Google, you can click Google Images. You can actually upload the picture. So you could save the picture on a profile and you upload it into Google Images, and then it pulls up if it finds that image somewhere else. So I think that's still a very good thing should do. People sometimes steal images from different sites or they use a stock photo, but now it's easier to create your own unique photo there. But yeah, you actually upload the image onto Google Images. So great question, and I'm happy to answer other questions as we go into some of these strategies here. I kind of alluded to this earlier, and this is part of the issue of media literacy is we read too fast and too shallow and too quick. So if you really trying to evaluate information, is it a bot, is it a person, when, what's the motivation? You're not getting that as much from a tweet. A tweet is just showing you the bare basics, one line, short and shallow bursts. And people just stay on Twitter. They don't necessarily click every single link and have it and read that article and go back. It's not set up to do that. That type of reading is in short bursts there. So if we're consuming information in quick and short bursts, well, we're really not evaluating and looking at the information we should be. We're also having our emotions be more impactful, because it's hard to be dispassionate and say, oh, why am I feeling this way? How is this headline making me feel? If we're just like all the time. And so there's a great book, and I have a reading list actually at the end of this webinar. Nicholas Carr, The Shallows, he talks about just this type of learning. You might see this in your own classrooms. You have a lot of information being thrown at someone at once. Someone's on your Zoom class, but has 3 other tabs up and they're reading. Do you think someone can really get a deep dive into something when they're looking at 3 different tabs and listening to music and watching TV? No, we're reading in a more shallow way, and we do that because there's just so much information out there. But it really affects how we evaluate information, this type of reading. So when I teach this to young people, I feel like I'm teaching a psychology class. I feel like I'm a therapist a little bit, but we really, really need to understand the emotions behind media and understand ourselves. So I say Plato's know thyself, which is at least attributed to Plato. You have to know yourself first, because when you don't understand yourself and your own biases, we use the word bubbles a lot, then it's hard to see how media is affecting you. And this is really hard stuff. I just want to say adults struggle with this as well, but you need to kind of understand your own temperature. You need to take your temperature and say, this is how this media is affecting me. And then you just say, why am I affecting this? How am I feeling? And why am I feeling this? So we do an activity with our teams where we show them different like media clips, memes, pictures, tweets, and we have them do a split-second response. Like, what are you feeling? First thing that comes to your mind, write it down, and then we actually have them map it out with their peers about their emotions. And it's a very helpful piece, because someone to a tweet, they might find that hilarious, but someone else finds it hurtful. And you have that all in the same classroom. But we assume that if we're upset by something, everyone else is upset by something, especially our tweens. That's where they are developmentally. They care about what their peers think. But it's helpful to look at and say, well, I feel this way, but someone else might feel differently, and to be empathetic towards those other feelings. So knowing thyself, taking that second to do that temperature check, and realizing other people think differently than you. So the what and when. I mentioned this earlier. What emotional response does the message create? When was their message created? And on the internet, especially with like blogs and sometimes other things, it's hard to know when the date was. A lot of memes and images and stories get recycled, and it gets jumbled up, twisted, recycled, and moved across. They don't know where the primary source is. These are some questions to think about. And what mental state were you in when you were consuming the message? So if I am hungry and you show me an advertisement of like tacos, I'm gonna want to be more likely to click on the tacos and want the tacos. If I'm not hungry, the tacos aren't going to affect me as much. So we also have to think not about only our emotional state, but are we tired? Are we hungry? Had we had a bad day earlier? I kind of joke around I talk about cyberbullying is nothing good happens at 2 a.m. But if you're tired, your defenses are a little bit lowered. You're more likely to react. You're more likely to say something without thinking. You're more likely to interpret things a different way. And so the basics of sleep and food are important for our media and mental health. If we are up late at night doom scrolling, for lack of a better word, we're going to be more affected by the media than if we looked at that media earlier in the day. So when did I consume it, that content? Now, I want to spend just a little bit of time on this concept of moral convictions. If any of you follow the Hidden Brain podcast, they just had a podcast on this with Dr. Linda Sitka, who studies this concept. So sometimes when we talk about media literacy, we talk about debunking and fact checking, and that is important, and that is a part of media literacy, and that will always be part of a media literacy. But also part of media literacy is understanding the other person's mental framework, because if someone has, and Dr. Sitka says, a moral convictions, a moral certainty. You also see the term Whitney Phillips use mimetic framework, just the way they see the world. These convictions to them are the same as 2 + 2 = 4. They believe it's universally true. So on these like hot button issues, which are like politics, abortion, we have immigration. Some of these hot button issues are moral convictions for people. They're not like a convention, or they feel so strongly about this. So she studies people with moral convictions and finds it's a different type of like feeling than other kind of things. They see it's universally true, and people who have a strong belief that predicts more social distance, more prejudice, more social media avoidance, anger, incivility, antagonism. So people see this as just a fact. It's just life. It's just a fact. It's just true. So you going in and trying to fact check them, it doesn't help. It actually can make it worse, because they believe it's universally true, and you're attacking their deeply held beliefs. So what we see a lot on social media is people sharing not news stories, but they're sharing their moral conviction through a news story. And so when you come at that news story and try to debunk or share, or it's not always going to be very well. And I don't recommend, in most cases, trying to debate this online. It needs to be in person. So if there is also these moral convictions can also be found in things like conspiracy theories. Q, for lack of a better word, the conspiracy of QAnon is kind of like a religion. They have a moral conviction it's true. So if you are trying to push against that, if they're not too far down the rabbit hole and they're just kind of dipping their toes in the water, you can kind of do that. But if they're deep in there, they bought the shirt from Etsy, although it's not sold there anymore. They are spending hours and hours and hours on YouTube. They are espousing that on their Facebook page. You trying to fact check that can make it worse, because they believe it's just universally true. And now you've come at their faith. Now you've come at their morals. So I won't spend much more time on this, but I want to just bring up this topic and take a link to the podcast if you want to dive more into it. But we need to differentiate when is just someone sharing a thought, something they find interesting, and when is someone sharing a moral conviction. And if they're sharing a moral conviction, we need to come at it a completely different way and realize their mental framework. So some more strategies here, the who and the where. We talked about this earlier. Not all content is human generated. Was the message created by hackers or trolls? When I say trolls, sometimes people share information. They say it for the lulz, LOLZ. They find it funny. They find it a joke. So sometimes it's hard to know if it's a joke or know if it's real. But if you know the person and they post a lot of things like this, or they're posting it in particular forums where jokes and trolling are popular, then that's going to be how you're going to evaluate that information differently than if just someone else is sharing that. So the who and the where. We share different types of information on different platforms. So where you're at, where you see the news, is something you have to think about as well. These are tough questions to ask. There's a lot of thinking that needs to be involved, and we're very tired and overwhelmed, which makes that thinking harder. So I want to pause for a second here. If you have any questions on some of the topics I mentioned some strategies. I went through the updated W's. We need to update how we teach media literacy. I'm going to show you a few more strategies and ways you can do it, but I'd like to hear from you. We are consuming information differently. We're accessing it differently. We're finding it differently. There's some interesting research behind like seniors and like boomers that they're more likely to find misinformation. But part of that reason is not because they're dumb. It's not because they're dumb. It's because they grew up with maybe 3 TV channels, and all the TV channels said the same thing. Cable news didn't get big until the 1980s or 1990s, really. So they learned as they grew up that they could trust what they heard on TV. That's how it was. So if you grew up in an environment where the news sources were more trustworthy, then you might fall prey to certain things. So there's a generational divide here. And if you think about our Gen Zs and our alphas, or Generation Alphas growing up, they are consuming and accessing information totally different than how we did when we were growing up. So what does this mean? Are we going to have a generation of nihilists that are just overwhelmed? Are we going to have more savvy, media literate young people? I think that we'll see. We'll see what happens. So one concept, another thing that we can teach is reading laterally. When I say laterally, you're reading like this. One source, one source, one source, one source. And now you're like, Carrie, don't tell me this because this is exhausting and I have too much to read. But we have to evaluate media different there. Yeah, and this is a great question that Karina had. So how do we check a source? Yes, I think there are some, and I should have included the image here. There are some that are less partisan than others. I find that if it's a government funded source like your BBC or your NPR, then you're more likely to find something less biased because there's a government funding behind that. So AP and routers are great. I was interviewing Dr. Christy Roschke, I have to say that right. She's at the Arizona State University Media Lab, and she's got a really great media literacy training. If you ever want to check it out, it's free on ASU site. But she's taught this topic for years, and she told me something. She's like, I used to be able to just say AP, New York Times, Washington Post, but now when I teach that, I get pushback. So that's an issue there. So I think it's good to talk about reliable sources, but we also have to understand the emotions and that moral certainty piece there. If someone's coming at some news with those frameworks, then your idea of a reliable source, they're just going to dismiss it because they're in that framework. They're not necessarily open to those other sources. But if we really want to be media literate citizens, we need to read laterally. So this could be looking at several tabs. This could be following a few different news sources. There's a great site called All Sides. I don't know if it's allsides.org or allsides.com that shows the right and left of each piece there. This also means following different people on Twitter or LinkedIn to get the other perspective. So that can be hard, right? It can be hard for anyone to read that perspective. You're like, how would they say that? But it's helpful to see it across a few different perspectives there. So open up the tabs there. Try to do some reliable sources, but I will say I've had these conversations with some people that even what I think is a reliable source, they don't see as a reliable source. So some other pieces of information to help us be more media literate is teaching young people about algorithms more. Part of the issue with the QAnon conspiracy, and there's been a crackdown on this, YouTube and Facebook and all of them have cracked down on it, is that you would join a group that was like adjacent to Q for some reason, like, or maybe one person in that Facebook group was part of another Q Facebook group, and then Facebook would be like, you might like these groups. So people would get in that rabbit hole because of recommendations from the algorithm. And this happened, people would be in like a mom's group or a yoga group, and then there'd be conspiracy theories, and they wouldn't even expect that in that group, and then you get kind of sucked down that. So understanding that YouTube's going to recommend things based on your search history, but the recommendations aren't necessarily true or fact checked or anything there. And the more we search, the more our past searching, we create cookies, we create a record for Google. Google's trying to be helpful. You know, Google used by 80, I say Google, 85% of searches are done around Google, that it is going to kind of change your results based on past searching. This can be a great activity for a classroom, is search for something a few different ways. Why is it this way? What do you think? Like, ask a different question and see the different results and compare it. So, and have all your students ask the same question and see if the search engine pops up differently as well. I also would recommend using different browsers if you can, like a DuckDuckGo or a Privacy Badger that doesn't track as much of the cookies, or using plugins that doesn't do that. That helps. But young people need to understand the algorithm, because when you are starting to go down that rabbit hole, I'll keep using Q as an example because it's everywhere right now. You assume, because you're getting recommendations from all these sources, that this is like everyone believes it. Like, oh, well, I keep finding it. It's here and it's here and it's here and it's here. So it must be true. There must be some validity to this. But what you're not understanding, that it seems everywhere to you because of the algorithm, not because it is everywhere. So grasping this concept is really part of a 21st century learner education, how the media and technology can manipulate our emotions, can manipulate what we see. And I'm not saying this is malicious by any means, it's a tool, but grasping this concept a little bit more. So I have a few more slides. This is the one, allsides.com I was mentioning. If you want to present multiple views, you can do some lateral reading on that site. These are a few other ones that you might want to check on. I like PolitiFact a lot. If you have any others that you use, Snopes, of course, is a fact checker that they do a lot of, sometimes pop culture type of fact checking as well. These are some sites to help, especially if you're struggling and you're finding a weird variety of different sources and it's kind of confusing. You can look and see if someone's fact checked it. And follow the money. So early internet, it was more, I guess, flattened. It was more democratized. There weren't as many big companies in this space. Now there's so much money being, e-commerce has changed some of this. So you have a lot of sources, like a blog post, and you're like, wow, this is a really great blog. And you might not know who created that blog. You might not have an author on it. You might not have anything. The company created the blog to better their algorithm. Their intent was not necessarily not necessarily to educate you, but to bring you to their site. So following the money, who is behind the website? How are they funded? How are their advertisements? Can I find out who's behind this website? Who made it? When it was made? If it's a legitimate nonprofit, they should be putting some financial reports and some more transparency, or people on the board or staff that are involved. If you're not finding any of this, well, that can be a red flag. But this is a deeper look into things. So we're not just looking at who, what, where, when, why. We're saying money. We're follow the money is there. So the internet is not how it used to be. There's a lot more money involved, and understanding those motivations. And I'm not saying just because a private company is behind a site, it's bad. Like I'm a private company and we have some great content out there, but you know, you have to think for a second, like, okay, well, why are they doing this? Is there another meeting? Is this, what do they want me to do? So I'm going to wrap up here, but share a few more pieces of information, and also leave some time at the end for Q&A. If we are doing more of these free webinars, we have one on November 11th on digital wellness. So we actually have a really great mindfulness teacher who's going to, oh no, that's in December, but we are going to do some like thinking and some more psychology. Who knew how much media literacy with psychology there? So it's a free webinar and focusing through tech distractions, especially with remote learning and remote work. That's coming up on November 11th, and you should get an email reminding you as well. But I would like to share some of my reading lists and references and then hear from you. This is a subject that's affecting all of us as well. It's growing, it's changing, and I'm really glad that you're here, that we can discuss, and hopefully you learned a little bit more about the tech landscape and media literacy. This was on my webinar reading list. If you have any other book recommendations, I love to hear them as well, to kind of dive into some of these topics. I mentioned the Shallows earlier. Homo Deus, which is the sequel to Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, has some great information about the media and the landscape there. And here's some references here, and Tay also put some references along in there if you want to kind of dive in. If you want to do some lateral reading of your own, here's some places you can look at. There's also this great article Atlantic did, Why Technology Favors Tyranny. I wrote a piece on deep fakes. There's some other psychology of moral conviction as well. So I'm going to go back here and give you our information and just take a couple minutes to see if there's other thoughts or questions that you might have on this big topic. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we will promise not to share fake news. We promise we're also not bots as well. So we love to keep talking to you. So thoughts or questions or anything you want to add? Yeah, so, and Tay also has some great articles on our newsletter that comes in twice a month. Yeah. How to see this again? She's gonna write in the chat as well, but you can do you want to put the link on our website where you can find it? We have a great free resources page. We have videos for students as well. If you want to, we have a great.
It's available on replay.
Yeah, it's available on replay as well. So you can. This is going to be recorded.
She'll get an email with the link.
You'll get an email with the link. It's also on our website. I want to put a plug in for one of our student videos aimed at tweens and teens about bubbles. So we talked a little bit about bias today and our moral convictions. And we have a video just for young people, like an animated one that talks about bubbles. So here's some of our references. I have like 3 of them. I mentioned this reference there. So yeah, I would love to just show you some. This is a really great article on teaching digital literacy as well. I included some of the ISTE standards. I didn't dive in too much to the Dunning-Kruger effect. That's related to bias, but that concept of bias is something really important for media literacy. There's a psychology of moral conviction, and this is the last page of references here. Some sites on. This is a great one on from teaching and teacher education about critical social media literacy. I'm just saying media literacy, but I'm including social media literacy in it. But you could dive in just on social media literacy if you want to go into this as well. And this other great one from School Library Journal about has a news literacy toolkit that's free as well that I enjoyed. So I hope that helps some there. So thank you. Oh yeah, so take and send out the references too. I didn't even put, and I had and at the very first slide, I put my CLA Alliance reference, and Tay included a few more, and she can send them along. So thank you. Yeah, thank you. We've got someone from the UK. I hope it was helpful. We'd love to have you out here. This is something that affects everyone across the world. I know that Q has gone overseas. It's really popular in Germany right now, so it's definitely affecting everyone. And we got Greece, so wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start wrapping this up in just a minute here and stop that recording, but I just want to say thank you again for being here. Tay is going to send out a link on a way to get this webinar later. It's completely free. We have a lot of free resources on our site, and good luck on this topic with everything. We appreciate all you do, and thank you and have a great day.